Okay, everyone. Welcome to a very strange episode of Pop Goes the Zebra. I am Jeremy the Ref. I'm sort of writing solo. I'm recording this little introduction well after the fact of what you're about to see. Um, what you're about to see is the episode that almost was. We almost got it in, but we didn't quite get it in, and you'll understand in a little bit when I set the stage for you. While back, we did the special on Apollo 13, doing the real life story versus the movie while we watched along. And true to form, true to the Apollo 13 story form, we had countless problems and delays and internet connection problems. And the weird thing was, we've not had a problem since, at least not to the level of what you're about to see. We had not had a single problem like that. We everything was generally pretty easy to do. But then when we kind of got into the production of Apollo 13, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And what you're about to see is sort of kind of like a blooper video, but not quite a blooper video. It's, as I said, it's the episode that almost was, but just quite isn't. So without further ado, we're going to show you what almost became the Apollo 13 special, which you can go see in our library. But here it is. We got, I'd say, about 20 minutes left in the movie, maybe a little less. But here is the alternative tracks between me and Jesse. Enjoy.
Have you ever had a really bad day? Because the flight of Apollo 13 did. In fact, I'd be willing to bet they'd have killed for just having a bad day compared to what they went through. And we're going to talk about that today. From the explosion on the oxygen tank to peeing in space and everything in between, we are going to talk about the legendary story of the flight of Apollo 13 while watching along with the movie. But before we do that, we figured we would set the stage for you a little bit. But before we even do that, I am Jeremy the Ref, along with my illustrious co-pilot, as it were, astronaut Jesse. And we're actually joined by a third member today. We got Rosie over here, just asleep at the wheel as usual. Good dog. Jesse, if you could, tell everybody at home the backdrop of this. Paint the picture. Take us back to the 60s and explain the narrative around this flight at that point, and everything that led up to it, and everything in between. Give us the backdrop.
So picture it: Sicily, 1916.
Wrong story.
Wait. That's the wrong story. Okay. So we have the Cold War, United States versus Russia, military superpowers trying to outdo each other. The nuclear war threat is absolutely on the horizon. They're trying to build missiles. We're trying to build missiles. It all comes to a head. 1957. They send Sputnik into space. The space race has begun. So from there, the United States tries to play catch up. Russians beat us every step of the way. They put the first man in space. They put the first woman in space, multi-crew in space. America's trying to play catch up. We have the Mercury program with the Mercury astronauts. We send 6 astronauts into space. We need some new astronauts. We get to the Gemini program. Start sending 2 people up at a time. Fast track into Apollo. Well, here's where we have a problem. January 1967, because we're trying to catch the Russians. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee die in a fire on the launch pad for Apollo 1. That sets America back 18 months. In that time, the Apollo command module's redesigned to be a lot safer, a lot more streamlined. We get going with Apollo 7, first flight of the Apollo. Apollo 8 goes to the moon. Apollo 9, we fly the LEM and the CM in Earth orbit. Apollo 10, we go to the moon, do a dress rehearsal, get to Apollo 11. That's it. That's the big landing. Everybody's waiting for this. Land on the moon.
I think we'll see that here in a little bit.
We beat the Russians. Guess
Then,
what? Nobody cares. Apollo 12 launches, gets hit by lightning 27 seconds into the flight.
Hmm.
They have a fantastic mission. Land beside Surveyor 3. They land beside something, pinpoint landing. Nobody cares. By the time we get to Apollo 13 in April of 1970, the United States general public, they don't care. They don't. As the term is coined, it's as exciting as taking a trip to Pittsburgh.
no offense to anybody
So
listening,
we're still
in
going to continue the
Pittsburgh.
moon missions.
I like Pittsburgh.
We're still going to continue the moon missions, but the public support has waned drastically. Coverage of the launch and coverage of what happens during the mission isn't even covered on live news. It's we'll show it later on the 10 o'clock news when there's time. The whole idea that space flights become routine, because aside from Apollo 1, every space flight has gone up and come back with no problem. So Americans believe that space flight is now routine, that we're in the day and age where, they're just going to the moon. Just another trip.
Hey, while you're there, pick us up a couple gallons of milk and some eggs while you're,
And that's kind of the mindset of where we're at. Unfortunately, like I said, it would take a tragedy, or a near tragedy, I should say, to bring the American public back into caring about the space program for at least a short amount of time. Unfortunately, the support comes back for Apollo 14. It's not there for 15, 16, or 17. So the American public just didn't seem to care. Once there was no longer a political goal of beating the Russians, that was it.
And
here we are.
That's kind of crappy.
We're going to do a watch along. Huh?
Oh, I was listening to what you had to say. I just this comment,
Hello?
With the waning, the back and forth
You have
support.
You're frozen.
I'm frozen. I'm talking.
Yes.
I'm talking.
You're frozen on my end.
But I'm frozen.
Nope, you're frozen on my end.
Okay, so we need to pull back the curtain a little bit. So we are filming this ahead of time. It's March 19th when we're recording this. That's really not important outside of we're just telling you when we're doing this. What is important is that we're talking about Apollo 13. This is the 13th episode that we would have recorded. And in the last hour and a half that we have been trying to get set up, we've had nothing but problems. Connectivity problems. Captain Planet over here has conveniently misplaced all of his copies of the movie that we're going to watch, either by lending or just can't find it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm starting to become a believer in this subject that Apollo 13 may have a little extra bad juju going on by it. So to the brave souls that were on that vessel, you guys definitely had it worse than we did, but in a small, very minuscule, minute way, I'm starting to get it. So with that being said, we're going to attempt, and notice I said attempt, to get this baby to land. And we're going to try to re-enter orbit here and crash down and get this baby into the vault. We're going to, after that summation by our co-pilot here, we are going to do a watch along of the movie Apollo 13, and Jesse is going to point out the accuracies as well as the inaccuracies. Not that we're in this to shit on Ron Howard or anything like that. That's no. The point of this episode is we are both very passionate about this subject. I believe that it is an outright travesty that when the words Apollo 13 escape someone's lips, the other person generally thinks of Tom Hanks. And that, not that there's anything wrong with the movie. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just, this really happened. Real people went through this real problem that we're about to watch, and they really solved this incredible riddle that of how do you get back from space, flying a wounded vessel with about the quintessential computing power of this cell phone that you carry in your pocket at all times. And they have to hit it just right, or they bounce off the atmosphere, or possibly miss the Earth entirely. They have no guarantee that the heat shield's going to work because they don't know if the explosion days earlier got to the heat shield. They may burn up on reentry. And again, real people went through this and lived. Spoiler alert, I know, but we wouldn't really be talking about this in the same levity if this had been the tragedy of the flight of Apollo 13. I just realized that my co-pilot had, oh, there he is. But yeah, this is a story that really deserves to be told and kept alive, because in my opinion, it's called the successful, or a successful failure. I think it's one of the finest moments in American history where we were able to solve a problem and get these boys home, because they are real people. They had real lives, real families to go back to. And again, somehow they did the impossible and they got here. And I cannot wait to tell this story. And if I may be blunt, I cannot wait to stop vamping while Jesse sits back down and puts his headset on and starts talking, because yeah, this is one of those. Oh well, hey, more problems on this episode.
give me about 5 seconds to figure out why something's not working.
Did we have a main bus B? You know. But again, this idea has been in our heads for a while, pretty much since the inception of this show, Pop Goes the Zebra, when we both kind of said during one of our BSing moments that, hey, we should do a show. That very night when we sat down to do a test run, we both agreed, you know what? At some point, we're going to do an Apollo 13 mission. And sure enough, we did. And then after this, at some point in the very near future, we're going to sit down and we're going to do our Titanic special as well. And I'm looking forward to that. We're not, in all honesty, we're not going to sit there and watch the 3-hour Titanic movie. Not that that thing isn't great. It is, but that isn't as paramount to have the movie there as tight, as Apollo 13 is here, because that's how a lot of people know about Apollo 13 is through the movie. Titanic was its own thing well before Leonardo DiCaprio was even born. No offense to Leo, I love him in Wolf of Wall Street, but yeah, the way that everything just kind of happened, they trained for months on end. They practiced. They had all sorts of scenarios and things going on that they prepared for. And this was literally one of those things where nobody really foresaw this type of a problem happening. The oxygen tanks rupturing and exploding due to malfunctions within them on a simple stir of the liquid oxygen. That really wasn't in the manuals for what to do in case of that type of emergency. And we're going to see how they solve that problem here. Jesse, do we have an update?
Yeah, I have.
Uh-oh, we've lost comms. Yep. Apollo 13, folks. Alive and in living color. It's Apollo 13. Are we gonna have to move into the lem? Uh, Possibly, because I think I got you back. Jesse, this is Houston. Do you read?
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I really wish we were just playing along for fun. It
No,
seems
we're
like us trying to.
and we lost him again. Oh. We're trying our best here, folks. Nope, nothing. Oh, now wait, I heard something.
Connectivity problems.
Connectivity problems.
See, I don't. That's kind of where I'm like, oh man, if we get this thing going and then we don't notice a problem.
I mean, what are we gonna do here, man? You know, in the spirit of the flight, they didn't exactly get to just take their ball and go home either.
This is
So
true.
that's kind of why
So
I really want to bore through this, because man, if we just stop this and try it another day, I really think that in its own way, it's kind of a slap in the face of those three men that went
it
up
is.
and
I'm
did
just.
that. Like,
I'm just gonna have to like. I'll figure out a way to hear because I need to at least hear the audio of certain parts. So I've
yeah.
got it. I've got it streaming from my phone to the TV. So at the very least, I should be able to hear it from my phone.
And I've got it queued up for those of you that are going to try to watch this along with us at home. Jesse and I are sitting at about the 5 second mark. You've got the Universal logo coming up from around Earth, Earth orbit. We're gonna do a rough countdown here in a second, and we're gonna try to get this puppy to land in true Apollo 13 form. We have no guarantee that this is gonna even work. We are literally putting ourselves in the hands of engineers, and we're gonna go for it. So Jesse, if you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay, I'm gonna hit play from my phone.
Actually, you know what? I think we have a better idea. Let's hit pause on the recording again, and then when we come back, we're gonna do the countdown of our lead in to the episode. So
Okay.
pausing now, and we're back. So without further ado, we are going to attempt to lift off here, and we're going to do so in 5, 4,
5
3.
play.
All right, here we go. The Universal logo has orbited the Earth and is flying over beautiful Africa. I've never been there, but I hear it's nice. So,
You know, the one thing about the opening of this movie is I absolutely love the score. James Horner is the person who did the score for this one and absolutely nailed it.
I'm going to try to turn it up a little bit so I can hear. I don't want to blow out my speakers.
Yeah, you've at least got to hear it a little bit.
Yeah.
So the first sequence that we're going to see is the depiction of
Jesse has frozen here, but we're seeing the opening
happening
footage.
and how they're closing this hatch.
Yeah, Jesse, you dropped out a little bit there, but which flight is this? No. No, we're having a little bit of comms issues with Jesse, but I'm going to try to pick up here a little bit. Uh, here we'll circle back to that, but now we're here. We are in July 1969,
Okay, now I can
Texas,
hear you.
and Tom Hanks is driving here with Walter Cronkite doing some narration. That was a good pickup. But
So
what flight was that on the opening there, Jesse?
that was the Apollo 1 fire. How they depicted it, however, that's not how the fire happened. They didn't flip a switch and then the fire broke out in the spacecraft. It just happened from an electrical short. And the way they depicted the hatch being closed was not accurate either, because if the hatch had been able to open outward, they would have been able to get the crew out. But because it was an inward opening hatch, because of all the pressure that built up in the spacecraft, they could not get the hatch open to get the crew out. So, artistic license to show dramatic what's going on.
Yeah.
That is quite the that's quite the party that Mr. Lovell's throwing here.
Inaccurate, because Jim Lovell would have been at mission control.
Yeah.
He was the backup commander for Apollo 11. So he would have been beside Charlie Duke at Capcom during the landing and I believe during the EVA phase. He may not have been there for the EVA phase, but he would have not been partying at home.
Again, creative license from Mr. Howard.
But the depiction of their house is actually apparently very spot on to the house that they lived in.
And here we see Gary Sinise portraying Ken Mattingly and Mr. Paxton
Next.
playing Fred Hayes.
You know, you got to look at like the series of movies that all these actors were in at this time. They were in like, absolute bangers.
I'm always up for anything Gary Sinise does because he's been very good to our troops with his Lieutenant Dan band project that he does. So I've always got time for Gary Sinise. You ever see Walter Cronkite on the telly? That's a nice telly they got there.
Here's an interesting fact about this. Walter Cronkite re-recorded his dialogue for this movie just to kind of update it for the dialogue of the movie itself. So,
you know, I aspire to have the crew cut that Bill Paxton is rocking here. That's as Abe Simpson would say, that's a haircut you could set your watch to.
Absolutely. And what's actually interesting about some of the actors that are the background astronauts for this, they would later be used in From the Earth to the Moon as astronauts. So they kind of like recycle people from this and From the Earth to the Moon, which was another Tom Hanks deal.
As we're watching this scene here with the lunar landing of Neil Armstrong, it's kind of depicted, or at least subtly hinted here, that there's a little bit of jealousy from Lovell. Was it ever that pronounced, or was it, just, just professional, I wish I was there too,
a lot of it with the astronauts was a professional, like, oh man, I wish it was me.
Yeah.
There were some astronauts that didn't really get the grandeur of going to the moon. Frank Borman from Apollo 8 didn't look at it as a historic voyage. He was just wanting to beat the Russians.
Hey, you know what? I can understand that. I'm still mad at them too. They killed Apollo Creed. I mean, sorry, dumb joke. But Armstrong is on the moon, and the race to the moon is officially over.
100%. And it's at that moment that Congress is like, well,
our job's done here.
Yep.
Based on the book Lost Moon by Jim Lovell. I've read that book. Great book.
I've got a first edition signed.
There you go.
So it is worth the read.
How and here we are, we're having a nice scene in the backyard with Jim Lovell and his wife. How accurate was the portrayal of Jim's wife here? Because I've been listening to some documentaries over the last couple of days. There's a nice audio documentary that BBC did, and they had actual phone calls of her talking to mission control after the explosions happened, and she sounded cool as the other side of the pillow.
Yeah, and apparently Kathleen Quinlan, or however you pronounce her last name, the actress in this, spent several months with the Lovells. She stayed at their house and got to know them and got to know Marilyn Lovell. And Marilyn Lovell gave her the thumbs up, said she did a very fantastic job.
Enough said.
Here's a fun little fact. Both Marilyn and Jim Lovell are in this movie, and I will point them out to you.
Oh, that's cool.
Yep. They are uncredited, but they are in this movie. But this is a real thing that he's talking about with Mount Marilyn. Mm-hmm. It is an actual geographical feature on the moon that the astronauts would in fact reference in relation to getting their bearings is Mount Maryland. So
There you
Mount
go.
Maryland is real.
Some people they'll pay the was it $75 to name a star. There's only a few people on the earth that can say that they got a, or maybe it's just one. I'm not sure. There's only one that can really say that they've got a mountain on another celestial body
Yeah,
named
and it,
after
it
them.
is actually recognized. It is a recognized feature. So whenever they're,
So
lunar reconnaissance orbiter is flying over, they can take pictures of Mount Maryland.
so in that regard, ladies, your boyfriend is selling you short. uh, All right, now we're fading to black here, and now we're at the vehicle assembly building in Cape Kennedy, Florida. A few
I
months later,
have been outside of the VAB, and you do not understand how large of a
it looks
building
massive.
you can see it from like 6-7 miles away.
I'm gonna spoiler alert. I'm gonna try to get out to Cape Canaveral here when I go down to Florida here in a few weeks, and I'm gonna go check all that out and see what I see.
I recommend it.
Yeah.
So another inaccuracy is they're not going to have that door open
No.
while they're stacking this. The building is so high that it can create rain clouds inside.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So did this scene actually? Is he out doing what I'm assuming is a guided tour for top brass when his boss comes in and says, "Oh, hey, you're going to the moon." Did it happen like this, or is this kind of again Ron Howard kind of
It's
making
more of a
things
Ron Howard
convenient?
thing. It's supposed to be just a visualization of all the different politicians complaining to NASA saying, "Hey, there's no reason for us to be going to the moon." It's convenient to say like, "Oh, well, we're going to be." I'm showing them a tour of the Saturn V. Would never happen because of how mission critical some of the hardware is. You don't want to contaminate that.
God, Tom Hanks is a handsome man. And I just buy him in everything he does. I buy that he is Jim Lovell. I buy that he's Paul Edgecombe.
I have decided that if I'm ever on some form of travel and Tom Hanks is on it, I want off of
it. True story. Well, I don't know. He seems to get back pretty well. That dude's rocking the Karate Kid gimmick before the Cobra Kai Halloween costume before.
So the mustard flight suit and jacket Jim's Lovell is wearing, slightly inaccurate. He those suits really didn't become used until the later Apollo missions, but I genuinely dig the gold look a lot better than the blue flight suits. I just think they look a lot cooler.
So here's my question. Assuming that the inner ear infection is indeed what happened, this is October. They're lifting off in April. Why would NASA bump somebody that just has an ear infection, 5-6 months out?
So the backstory as to why that happened is Al Shepard had Meniere's disease.
Okay.
He did not know that he had it until he was prepping for his first Gemini flight, which would have been Gemini 3. He started having dizzy spells, vomiting, ringing in his ears. And at that point, the flight surgeons grounded him.
Gotcha.
And he was grounded for almost 10 years until fellow astronaut Tom Stafford knew a ear, nose, and throat doctor that was working on a new procedure for Meniere's. And Shepard did the procedure. He got his clearance to fly. But NASA was concerned that he was not up to speed and he was still having residual issues. So it was safer to take him off of 13, give him more training time, because he was flying with 2 rookies as well.
Right.
Shepard had only had 15 minutes in space on his pop gun flight. So it made more sense to put a more well-trained and seasoned crew in.
Gotcha.
And they decided to move 13 or 14's crew to the prime crew.
And here we're seeing what is probably one of my favorite parts of the movie. I don't know how accurate the simulators are to what they went through in in 1970 to do their prep, but I've always loved this scene in the simulators, and they're
It
practicing the docking here
it
that you'll see
is
later to the
not
limb,
it
lunar.
is not
Yeah,
super far off, actually. They
and,
used cameras. They used
yeah,
small
it's
cameras to
smart.
depict the landing and stuff like that. It was a full working replica of the command module,
And
and that scene.
here we Jesse has cut out again real briefly. I'm just gonna say here comes Ken or Jack Swagger played by Kevin Bacon. They're gonna get in there and they're gonna get their time in. The backup crew, from what I understand, they train just the same as the main flight crew will, the prime crew, just
Yep.
in case a situation just like earlier comes to be, like we'll see later where Gary Sneeze's Ken Mattingly gets bumped out. So Swaggart, who'd already had time in the simulator and trained uh, for Mattingly's job, was just an obvious candidate to take his spot.
Yep.
So when you see
Um,
they aren't just treated as freshmen on the JV team that are just there to fill a spot. They're just as important as the prime crew.
yeah. So the backup crew for Apollo 13 was the prime crew for Apollo 16, which consisted of veteran astronaut John Young, Charlie Duke, and Jack Swigert. Um,
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure nightmares like these have happened more often than some of the astronauts would probably like to admit. We're seeing a nightmare scenario here where depressurization of the command module has happened. Everything's going to hell now. I'm sure the astronauts, the families, the brain will wander while you're sleeping, and this is probably a real concern in somebody's mind.
oh, 100%. Uh, there were several wives. One of them was Frank Borman's wife. She ended up becoming an alcoholic because of the amount of stress she was under due to knowing her husband was on these long missions. And several of the astronauts' wives had drinking problems because of this.
And
Uh,
that makes sense. I mean, because you got to kind of put yourself in a position of not knowing. We have the luxury of looking back at all of this with hindsight being 2020. At this point in the timeline of Earth, even though we had gone to the moon, space flight wasn't exactly as routine as the press would make this out to be. A lot of stuff was still kind of we believe so. This is what we're going with. They were still kind of learning as they went
yep.
too. So it was
Um,
very rational at that point in time for the wives to worry about something like this because you just never know.
yep.
And
Um,
obviously things did go wrong here.
yeah.
Here we have a nice scene with Tom Hanks talking to his youngest son here about the previous flight and the accident that happened there.
Yeah. So the thing with this scene is it was just a simple way to explain to the viewers um, the concept of the Saturn 4B or the S4B booster going into lunar orbit. This is what's happened. We're going to go in these spaceships, and then we're going to go to the moon. Like it's a quick little
Yeah,
visual aid,
for
so
us
that way
the
people kind
audience.
of have an understanding. Um, I actually have those model kits.
Yes, sir. And
They're sitting in a box over here.
it's kind of ingenious the way things would work to get it up there.
Yes.
It, it it's so complex but so basic at the same time. That's a nice no blinker merge there by Mr. Lovell. I don't know if he's
No, no, his
incriminating
blinker was
himself.
on. His
I did
blinker
not
was
see a blinker, sir. I'm
solid.
lighting him up.
Um, this scene in particular, it could happen, whatever. But this is true. They were having astronauts doing these press tours up to like days before the launch.
Lucky 13. Mrs. Lovell has been very on record about not loving that.
Yes, she was very open about
And Mrs. Lovell, if by some chance you're watching this, considering all the problems we've had just getting this to record, I'm with you.
NASA was not superstitious. They did not believe in that.
There's no
After
money in the
this,
budget for superstition, man.
there has never been a mission 13. There's never been a STS 13.
Nope.
NASA was not taking chances. Even the Russians opted not going to take that chance.
Yeah.
So, there all the science in the world can explain supernatural events, and
I think Charlie Daniels put it best in one of his songs. There's some things in this world you just can't explain.
Yep.
Shout out to the legend of the Woolly Swamp. Man, I just say, did Jim actually have this car? And if so, where is it at now? Because that thing is gorgeous.
The astronauts pretty much had brand new Corvettes.
Oh man, that nice little perk.
That is a true fact. There's pictures of the Apollo 12 crew with their custom Corvettes. There's pictures of the Apollo 15 crew with their custom Corvettes. Just one of those things.
Now this is fun. The taking them up to get their bodies calloused up for the G forces that they're going to face through various points in the mission. A lot of people would not think about that that aren't as rabid a NASA fan as you. They wouldn't think about having to put your body through that kind of a workout, so to speak.
Sorry, you dropped out for a second.
I was just commenting that not a lot of people would think about the astronauts maybe going up into fighter jets to just kind of build up their resistance to the G forces that would come in space flight.
So the common form of transportation for the astronauts going between Houston to Kennedy to anywhere else, they would fly T-38s. The T-38 trainer is the typical. That's the astronaut jet. That's what you train your G-force tolerance in, but it's also your main form of transportation.
Gotcha.
Because you can go from Houston to Kennedy in just a couple hours.
That makes sense. There's nothing routine about going to the moon.
This press photo would have not happened this close to the launch. The photo would have been done weeks and weeks and weeks ahead of time, just for press publication to be handed out at PR events, for the crew to sign, stuff like that. So the cool thing is that is the accurate background. As I'm looking at the actual crew photo over my shoulder.
Now, did Lovell kind of surprise people on the press tour by saying that was going to be his last, or did he clue clue his crew in on that, or because
it was known long before that?
Yeah, so because the way that scene kind of played, the way Gary Sinise kind of looks at Tom Hanks gave me the impression that was news to him.
Yeah. So this scene that's right here.
Yeah, where they're telling what they're going to give him the bad news.
Well, the Saturn V would have already been on the launch. It would have already been out at Pad 39A. It would not be rolling out to.
I'm sorry. I'm seeing these treads like going on. I hate to jump on that, but I see those treads for the tank, and I just thought of the Shagohod. I'm so sorry. I don't know why, but continue.
The Saturn V would have already been moored at Pad 39A months and months ahead of time. They would have not rolled out 2 days ahead of time.
And is NASA not worried about the exposure to the elements at that point? Like, there's no fear of that?
There's actually a mobile structure designed for that. So when they need to work on parts of the Saturn V, it's a large structure that will roll up and enclose
the
Saturn V.
Okay. And here we're obviously Tom Hanks's character, not character, I hate to call it a character. Jim Lovell is being informed that Ken Mattingly has no immunity to the measles. So they want to swap Ken Mattingly for Kevin Bacon's Jack Swigert. And Lovell has said he's been upset, or that he was upset at it, but did it play out that way? Or no?
Nope, they were professional. Lovell understood, and Ken Mattingly would have chosen Swigert himself as the replacement, because Swigert chose specifically to be the command module pilot.
Yeah.
He knew more about the systems inside the command module than the
He,
entire crew.
in fact, he helped like manufacture and produce and create some of the technology on there, if I remember correctly. So
He was honestly the right person for
talk
what's
about
going
the
to
right
happen.
stuff. And
Now,
you know,
it's an interesting contrast in the movie scene itself that you get somebody that has that elation. They're so excited. Then you cut to Ken Mattingly, who just found out he's
his
3
puppy
days
died.
before the
Yeah.
launch that
Um.
he's being pulled off.
Yeah. I had a thought and I just completely lost it. But
I'll give you a second to get it back. So the thing is, when Ken is told that he's being pulled off the flight, he's upset, but he immediately goes into, all right, well, I've got to get Swigert up to speed. So
Next
he
man
is
up.
assisting Swigert on last minute prep and all the stuff. And there are photos of Mattingly and Swigert quickly going over stuff to get him up to speed. The crew did get in the simulators up to the night before the launch,
Yep.
just so that way they could get on par with each other. So that aspect is true.
Just kind of watching this scene happen. Yeah, I've listened to Mr. Lovell speak, and all I ever hear from out of him is steady Eddie, and that definitely speaks to the right guy being in charge of a mission like this. You know, because space travel, I don't care
I
how
agree.
routine you want to call it, it's not easy. If it was, everybody would do it.
Um, in this situation, I feel like, you know, any of the crews would have been properly trained to handle it, but it would take a specific type of person to handle it a certain way. And I think this was just the right storm of having the three best people in the situation.
Hmm.
I think any mission, any of the astronauts could have gotten back, but with the crew that they had was a guaranteed chance.
Mm-hmm. And now we're in the flight simulator now with Mattingly, or not Mattingly, with Swaggart in the pilot seat. He's now going to practice docking with the LAM and
No.
or
They're
no,
practicing the reentry
they're
phase.
practicing reentry. I apologize, right? Because okay, little interesting tidbit. You and I have talked about this offline, but one of the things that I've caught that I think kind of plays a little differently than what really happened is the way that this movie portrays things. It portrays Fred Hayes as well as Jim Lovell as being, I don't want to say more grizzled, but you get the impression, I at least the first time I watched this, you get the impression that Hayes has actually been to space, has done this before, but in reality, he was a rookie to space just like Swagger was. Lovell's the only one that had really been up there. Oh no, you were just about to make a point and we froze. So I'm gonna vamp until you come back. But yeah, I just always found that kind of interesting that they're kind of making Swagger to be the baby face newborn here, and Hayes is kind of with kind of on the other end of the spectrum with Tom Hanks. But you cut out as you were about to make your point, so I vamped until
Oh yeah.
you were back. So go ahead.
Fred Hayes was on the backup crew of Apollo 8 with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Um, because of certain things being shuffled around with Mike Collins having back surgery, that's how Fred Hayes was moved to the backup crew of 8. Um, I forgot how the crew assignment would back him up again, but he ended up being the backup on 11 with the Apollo 14 crew, which was Jim Lovell, him, and Ken Mattingly. So at that point, Fred Hayes had been a backup once and had already gone through a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
And he had worked with Lovell quite a bit, so he and Lovell had a level of camaraderie. So they
So
kind of got along very
to
well.
a point, he was a grizzled veteran, but in this scenario, he was in a lot of ways just as green as Swagger could be.
And this scene would not happen. The crew would have been in a quarantine, actual quarantine, a 2-week quarantine before the mission to make sure that they don't get sick in space.
See, quarantines
Quarantine
existed
works
before
when you do it
2020.
right. But no, letting the crew out like this would have been an absolute risk to them catching any sort of
Yeah.
24-hour, 48-hour bug that could potentially cripple them in space.
I do appreciate them at least going through some lengths of trying to at least show they're trying to be cautious, even though, as you said, this would never happen. I at least appreciate them trying to portray some semblance of separation while giving us an obvious emotional moment here before the shit hits the fan in a little bit here in the movie. I get what you're saying. I think it works on screen though.
Yeah, and for the movie, you've got to take several things and mash them into one just to help tell the story. Because
you're taking a 5-day story and mashing it into 2 hours.
Yeah, if you take all of the stuff that goes on, you're going to lose a lot of people in the jargon in real life. Yeah. Interesting thing about this scene:
nipples.
Nipples. So this is the suit tech room. This is where the astronauts are getting suited up.
Yeah.
The person he is talking to, Gunter Wint, is the pad leader. He's not going to be in the suit room. He is going to be in the white room, right beside the command module, prepping the command module for flight. Gunter would have not been in the suit prep room.
Is Gunter the one not wearing the hat?
No, Gunter is the one walking right there.
Yeah.
Interesting thing. You can tell that this was shot, like they actually used the real suit room, because on the window in the back, you can see the NASA worm logo. So they were actually filming on location in the real suit room.
So
during the
I've never heard. Did this really happen? Did
Yes.
she lose her ring down the? Okay.
She did in fact lose her ring.
That poor woman.
It did not go down super far. They had to get a maintenance person to fish it out, but she did in fact wash her ring down the drain.
More and more and more, just little inconveniences building up to a bigger problem.
Absolutely. A lot of people criticize that scene in the movie, saying, "Oh, that's just being crazy." And Marilyn Lovell said, "No, that really happened."
Yeah.
She thought that was the omen. That was her omen right there.
Yeah. That's why it's in the film.
Cool little attention to detail that people won't notice is in the scene of Lovell getting suited up. You actually see that he has his naval class ring on his finger. That's real. That's Jim's real ring.
I hate to be a little comedic here, but how about that guy we just saw with Hayes? What was your big Hollywood break? Bill Paxton spat gum into my hand.
Bill Paxton took a lot of creative liberties with the Fred Hayes character. Because Fred Hayes is from Biloxi, Mississippi. He was not a very over-the-top person. Hang on. Here in just a second, you will see Marilyn Lovell.
Okay. I'm scanning the background because obviously it's not going to be too terribly foreground.
She's you may be just a tiny bit ahead of me for a second.
They are riding up the elevator now.
Yeah, they're riding up the elevator, passing USA.
Yeah, we're looking at the Saturn V now.
The roll pattern, the paint that's on the Saturn V is inaccurate. There are certain parts of it that are inaccurate.
Okay, we're clapping.
That would be her in the middle with the blue and the white shirt.
Gotcha. I saw her.
She was there, part of that scene.
Overall, the
not gonna lie, this scene still gives me goosebumps.
Oh yeah, how can it not?
It is one of the coolest, and it's not terribly far off.
The CG probably doesn't hold up as well. That's clearly done with some green screen background, obviously, but it still works. This. I believe this is a historical fact. He always wore a white vest from his wife.
Wore a white vest. His wife would make him a vest for each
or
mission.
made it. Yeah, there was always a vest for the mission. Yes,
and she made him this one, and it was in fact late getting to him, and he was nervous.
They are strapping him in.
you're getting ready to ride a rocket, you got to make sure those.
I watched this a week or so ago with the family, and somebody like, they're going to step on him to strap a in, and I was like, well, yeah,
Yes.
you don't want any movement at that point. You want
That
them
is-
staying in that seat.
That is a true fact. Rookie astronauts thought that it was hazing until they actually flew, and they said no, we needed to be strapped in. When the when the S1 drops off, it would kick them forward.
Oh yeah, and we'll see that here in a little bit. Shout out to Ed Harris being in here. He's one of those guys, man, playing the flight director.
I don't think they could have cast anybody else in this role. I think
he's one of those.
He was so good.
Look at that crew cut again. You can set your watch to that haircut.
I mean, you look at pictures of Gene Kranz from this time.
It could be his shadow. We are go at control.
Stories about walking into the trench for mission control was a lot of times you couldn't see when you walked in because there was so much cigarette smoke in the room.
Launch control at Cape Kennedy, Florida. Go for launch, baby.
I said a lot. This scene with Mattingly could not happen.
No, he's far too close.
Yeah, the reason why I say that, A, he would have been in Houston. He would have been there helping them, whatever he could. B, there's a 3-mile exclusion zone around the launch pads because they deemed that to be the minimum safe distance if the Saturn V blew up.
Yep, and he's far. If he's a mile, he's far too away. He's
and
a foot,
the vibrations from the launch alone could set grass on fire.
Yeah,
it would shake a human body apart.
Oh yeah,
I just
artistic license. Obviously you and I know that wouldn't happen, but
yeah, like I said, the
now
role
real quickly,
F1s.
We saw the thrusters there, the engines at the back, at the bottom. In a little while, that's going to come into play here a little bit.
Let me go.
I do want to circle back around to that because I have a question on that here in a second as to how it would play out. Here we see it again. You notice there are 5 thrusters there at the bottom of the rocket, and that will come into play here as one of the issues with the flight.
So
we're lifting off.
All the arms would have retracted at once.
Yep.
This is to build up the tension of the rocket igniting. All of the arms would have just moved at once because the rocket, as soon as it hit full power, was going. There was nothing stopping
it. And away we get. We have liftoff of Apollo 13. It is about to clear the tower. And again, this score just gets me, man.
Oh yeah, this is probably one of the best movie scores ever.
We have cleared the tower. And away she goes.
So basically, launch control at Kennedy Space Center has control over the rocket until it clears the tower. Once you've cleared the tower, Houston officially has control of the mission.
So here's my question. I've never been inside of a NASA rocket, and I probably never will be. We're lifting off here. Is there somebody sitting at mission control or in the pilot seat here, and they're just holding a little joystick guiding this thing, or how are they guiding this rocket to its point? Is it just simple mathematics?
The rocket is flying itself.
Okay.
The instrument unit, which is just above the third stage, just below the slaw panels where the lunar module is kept, that's the brain of the Saturn V.
Okay.
That's flying the rocket. All Level can do is, in the event of an emergency, pull the abort handle, and the launch escape tower will take the capsule off of it.
Well, there it is. There it is. The S1 dropping off.
And it's a little over dramatic with them flying forward that far, but they said when that S1 dropped off and the S2 kicked on,
you knew it.
You knew it.
Huh? And they're kind of speeding
So
this up a
as
little
I
bit
can
in
go
terms
ahead
of
and
the timeline. So we're up in what I would call Earth orbit.
well, no, they're still in the process of going up. So the S1's dropped
All
off.
right, so we've got a 5 center engine cutoff.
The center engine.
They
so
were
basically, what happened during the course of the mission, and this happened on every Apollo mission. It specifically happened on Apollo 6. Is pogo, where the vehicle will oscillate up and down, and by doing that, it caused fuel lines to rupture in the center engine, causing it to cut out.
Okay, so my question on that is, obviously, they will just burn the other engines for a little longer. Did that have any effect on what would come later? And how did that play into their trajectory going home? What was the effect on that engine cutting out at that point going forward through the mission? Was it an isolated incident, or did it just kind of add to the pile?
It was an isolated incident. On Apollo 6, they ended up losing 2 engines and somehow managed to limp into orbit. So NASA knew that they could lose up to 2 engines and still make it to orbit. What it's doing is that means those other engines are just going to burn the remaining fuel. That fuel is accounted for the weight and for the thrust. So, all right, well, we lost a little bit of thrust. Well, if we keep burning, we will still reach that altitude. We just have to burn the engines 5 to 10 seconds, 13 seconds longer.
There's a little
how
bit
long
of
they actually had
smoke.
to burn.
There.
So now your S2 has tumbled away.
And now they are
now in the parking orbit.
Yep.
What this does, it gives the ground crew and it gives the flight crew the ability to check out the platform, to check their gimbal angles, to check their altitudes, make sure everything's where it's supposed to be before they start the TLI burn, which is the translunar injection burn. They're going to make one orbit around the Earth using Earth's gravity to come around.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to fire that engine again, and it gets them right out of Earth orbit.
Yep. Now, I'm assuming that Mrs. Lovell is talking to, I'm going to go with Mrs. Hayes.
Mary Hayes.
Mm-hmm. So they do touch on the fact that this is Hayes' first trip, definitely here.
Yes. And this is...
Well, here comes the press.
This is a true thing. The press would hound the families. Whether it was a good thing, a bad thing, anything. They wanted a story about the astronauts or the astronaut family and would do anything to get that.
Going to the moon. And I believe you, Ed. I really believe you. Now, and I'm assuming if they went through all the trouble of telling this story, that they made mission control look as accurate as they could.
Apparently, the advisors, which were old mission controllers, when they left the set, would attempt to make a turn to go to the elevator to go down to the lobby because they felt as though they were back in mission control.
So Fredo really gets some flight sickness, or
true
story.
And it was in fact from overeating. He was very zealous with his breakfast that morning. The astronauts, for the most part, from what I recall, would have filet mignon, eggs, toast, orange juice, and milk for breakfast.
Steak and eggs, baby.
Not an egg person, but definitely a steak person.
All right, now we're going to attempt to dock with the LEM.
And this is still a very interesting thing that you're going to separate,
turn around,
float out, turn around, come back.
So they're going to be nose to nose, and that's how they're able to move from the LEM to the command. I'm still learning. It's the LEM, the CSM, Command Service Module. Yes.
So basically, your LEM is here in the
Spider,
S4B.
And there's the Command Service Module.
Actually, Apollo 9's lunar module was called.
Yeah. So they're going to dock nose to nose so that they're able to move back and forth. I've lost you again, Jesse, so I'm going to kind of narrate on my own. And they're going to, they're going to attempt to do that. And that's the scene here. And I'd imagine that while this scene's probably amped up a little bit for dramatic effect, that the heart rate was still slightly elevated nonetheless because you're in space and anything can go wrong.
Just a little bit. It was not one of those things where the controllers were looking over like, oh, come on, is he going to do this?
Yeah, it's not this dramatic, but
every docking in space is dramatic. Apollo 14 had an issue where there was a tiny speck of dust that was keeping a latch from latching. So they made several attempts to dock and almost had to abort the mission until command module pilot Stu Rusa decided to give it a little bit more gas, docked it,
give her some gas
forward, and it latched.
See, for all the technology and the subtleties of space flight, sometimes all you got to do is apply a little bit of extra force. And
the communication was from lunar module pilot Ed Mitchell going, well, go ahead, give it a little bit more gas. That's what he did.
Hey, we have capture. They're gonna pressurize the tunnel there, and they're able to move around and get to their science lab, so to speak.
Yep. Well, they don't get into it right away.
They have the ability.
Yeah, but they don't do a limb checkout for at least a day. There's no reason to. There's no reason to waste the power.
And like I said, they speed up the process here a little bit because it's a 2-hour movie.
Yeah,
This is taking place over the course of 2-3 days, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Nice
that line that he drops was not a Fred Hayes line. That was an improv Bill Paxton line.
And I didn't catch the line. What was that?
I'm so hungry I could eat the ass out of a dead rhinoceros.
I just don't really see Fred Hayes saying that, but I could be wrong. I've never met the guy.
He was more reserved than that. He was a practical joker, though. He did play pranks on people.
It's silent but deadly. Here we're going to take a good look at the damn thing, and one of those panels is going to come into play here momentarily.
I'm not going to lie. Some of the CGI, well, okay, I can't say CGI because some of those shots are of large-scale models.
Yeah.
Shot on a,
something about
Star
practical
Wars
effects. Yeah, Star Wars did the same
effects,
thing.
Man.
Overboard dump.
This is a real thing.
That's how you go pee in space.
The constellation Orion.
I can't help but not comment that is such a human thing to do. Just roll down the window and pee into space.
little port right here is overboard dump.
She's so mad that the Beatles broke up. I'm assuming that this isn't the real thing, but I kind of hope that it is,
This is one of those things I don't 100% know for sure. It's not something that I've looked into to know the accuracy.
And here we're going to see the broadcast, and I'm going to touch on something here in a little bit and pull the curtain back on our show. We haven't really talked about this, but I know it popped you when I did it the first time. But we'll talk about it in a minute. But I'm assuming that the broadcast was pretty faithful to what they actually saw back in 1970.
To a degree.
Jimmy Wynn just rounding third there.
Yep.
And I'm going to let you comment on this here in a second. Talking to the spirit, baby.
That actually didn't happen.
Right.
They did have the theme to 2001 Space Odyssey play. Eventually, Fred would take over the cassette player and have... he was more of a country western person, just like a lot of the astronauts. So there was a lot of country music played.
Yeah.
Good country music, I might add.
A little bit of Waylon, a little bit of Hank, maybe a little bit of Johnny.
There were some astronauts that were big fans of Johnny Cash, so that is a statement that is very true. This is something that it was very apparent to NASA's public affairs office was they're losing public support when these guys are on their way to the moon and the news won't cover it.
Granny Lovell, I'm gonna call her. Um,
I
Talk to me about her
it's
scenes.
it's that damn TV guide again. I swear I would say that so much as a kid and it would irritate my mom. It's that damn TV guide again.
I love that they're. I'm calling it Tang. I don't know if Tang was invented in 1970, but because
Tang
I
was
love
actually
Tang.
Tang was not really used on space missions. That's a myth.
You're killing a lot
They had an orange drink, but it was not Tang.
an orange juice like drink. We'll call it orange juice.
Tang was actually based off of what the orange drink was. So there's a little correlation. Them playing around with it in space, they wouldn't
seems kind of dangerous to do.
They wouldn't just spray juice across the cabin like that, but they would play with their food. They would throw stuff across the cabin.
Of course, you're experiencing zero gravity for the first time for a couple of them. You can't not let the 3-year-old in you come out for a second, you know.
And see, here's one of the things that made this movie so groundbreaking was they built full mock-ups of the command and service or command and lunar module cockpits, and they put it inside of a KC-135, the Vomit Comet, and they would film in 35-second parabolic arcs.
What are the cord? What's the big tether cord coming off of the astronauts going into their suit?
Basically, that's the communication line to the command module. So
okay.
The headsets that they're wearing are Plantronics MS-50s. They're just airliners headsets that were adapted to be used in space flight. This is a real thing.
Yep.
I also want to point out that nice little flashlight floating by. I have one.
Uh-huh.
Of course I do.
Anything you have doesn't surprise me at this point, Jesse.
At this point, yes.
Here we go.
We sell these at Luna Replicas.
So here we are. The sign-off of Apollo 13 is something that I have blatantly stolen at the end of every episode we do. Back on Earth, pleasant evening. And it came out one night, and it was probably because we were talking about doing this episode, and it just organically happened. And every episode now, I sign off the exact same way.
And you would think you would think I'd be the one doing it, being the NASA person.
It just happened, and you know.
But no, so the main way to communicate, there was not wireless technology. So in order for them to communicate, they would have to plug your headphones in to communicate. The service module has the S-band antenna. And now this is how they would be able to communicate.
And now the fateful moment. They've just been told to give their oxygen tanks a stir, which, for those of you that don't know, they're not up there with just gaseous O2. It comes in liquid form, and they have to stir it every so often to keep it fresh and keep it circulating.
So basically, what would power the fuel cells was oxygen and hydrogen. The byproduct is water and electricity.
And there was a short inside the tank. Which, how did that happen, Jesse? How did it come to be?
So in preparation for the Apollo 10 mission, several tanks were being swapped around from different service modules, and one of the oxygen tanks was dropped only about 2 inches. It was X-rayed. There were no cracks in the tank itself, so they deemed it safe for space flight. What they were not aware of was it caused damage to the wiring. And it was used multiple times. They had to test it. And over time, the wiring would cause the insulation to wear down till eventually, at some point, the spark's going to happen. And it just happened to happen at this point.
And they had Teflon inside there that made it worse.
Yep.
And
now think about how quickly, right after the broadcast, that this happened.
It happened less than a minute.
In real time, the broadcast ended, and in about 10 minutes after the broadcast is when the accident happened.
Wow.
So the families were not even home. They were on their way back to their homes in Houston when the accident happened.
And so what's going to happen here going forward is they're losing oxygen. And as you said, the oxygen is pretty much what powers the whole thing. And that's what generally leads them to shutting down the entire spacecraft is they're trying to conserve power to get home. So the oxygen wasn't just so that they could breathe inside the bloody thing. They needed to have their computers up so they could try to get this thing to navigate itself back to Earth.
That was the thing. They believed it was a fuel cell issue because if there was a damaged fuel cell that was draining the oxygen by shutting one of the fuel cells down, you're going to cut the flow of oxygen or O2, O2 and hydrogen would slow it down, keep it from leaking out. But they didn't realize the extent of the damage to the service module until much, much later.
Then now they're bouncing. Here, I don't think people watching this really understand just how much peril the astronauts are in at this point. They're bouncing around on their telemetry, rotating, spinning. When we think of navigation and travel, we tend on Earth to think of forward, back, left, right, up, down.
Yeah.
Take that and we think in a square-like pattern, either square, vertical, or horizontal. Bigger here because now you're talking spherical because now you're adding a bunch of more axes into a place where there is no ground and there is no sky. There's no just void. There's void. You can lose your orientation like that. And if you lose that in space, you're in trouble.
And so the explosion itself in relation to the crew cabin is here. Here's the hatch. Here's where the command module pilot, currently Jim Lovell, is sitting in this seat.
Yep.
The explosion occurred just below him in quadrant 4, just above the high gain antenna. This entire panel from the radiator down all the way over is blown out.
Which is why there was so much concern that maybe, just maybe,
the heat shield.
That heat shield was hit.
Well, that's also why Lovell was able to see the gas escaping because it was just not far off of
it was fortunate enough to be where he could actually see it out of his sight because this isn't like an airplane where you got an aisle with windows going up and down. They only had so much space where they could see with their eyes.
Yeah, you've got two side windows.
A lot of blind spots.
2 docking windows that are forward facing, and then you've got the window on your hatch, and that's pretty much it. That's all you can see into space. The other dangerous thing is where the explosion was. This umbilical on the side of the service module to the command module that's the power source. All of your cables go into the command module here. So that itself could have been damaged.
For those of you at home, if you can hold that replica up again really quick, just give me a good full view of it. That's actually 2 things in one. That top cone part comes out, and that is how the astronauts will try to get home. That's got the heat shield underneath it. And, when we say we're not sure if the heat shield got hit, you show them again where that explosion was. Because, as I said, that's technically two separate entities entirely. That big part,
like this unfortunately doesn't have a very good representation, but the explosion itself came all the way up to the radiators. And the radiator system itself is just below where the heat shield would sit.
And now they're getting what they would call the notification that they just lost the moon.
Yeah, and I as well as I know the name, I can't pronounce it very well. Cy Liebergard.
Yeah, Cy.
He's the econ.
Yep.
He's econ. He's the environmental control officer for this shift.
Played by Ron Howard's brother.
Here. Yes, Clint Howard. Does a very, very good job of it. But this is a real conversation. It wasn't face to face. They were communicating
on headset.
Via their headsets.
That's why they're wearing
Gene
them.
Kranz did not leave his post. He sat there
And
What he would do is every bit of communication, he would make a notation of it, the time, what was said, what the call was. He was dictating moment by moment what was
he's the
happening
quarterback.
for record. That's what he's doing. He's a flight director
He's the
because
general.
that information has to be passed over to the next flight director for the next shift.
And I think this movie, if I could nitpick one thing, I'm not saying it does a bad job or anything like that. No, it does a wonderful job, but it does not accurately portray the steadiness that Gene Kranz had to have during this entire ordeal.
And that's the thing. If you played the movie exactly how it happened, it would not be as exciting because you didn't have those dramatic moments. Gene Kranz would never lose his cool. His whole mantra was think, react.
And I believe I remember him saying in an interview, if they see you sweat, that is when they know that all is lost.
Yeah.
Because how you react is how the people underneath you are going to respond.
Yeah.
So if he loses his shit, those guys up there in that cockpit, 200,000 miles away from Earth, are screwed. And we've just lost Jesse again. I will vamp until he comes back. The situation that they're in, I can't imagine the oh shit factor going on at this point.
Okay,
I'm vamping here just for a second. Let me finish my thought. The oh shit factor that went through their mind. I don't know how quickly they realized exactly what the magnitude of the problem was, but I can't imagine it took them longer than a couple of minutes at most.
Fred Hayes told me directly. He said, we knew within about 10 minutes we were not going to the moon and we had a problem.
A big problem. Which that famous line was not originally first said by Lovell. It was said by Swagger. And
Swigert said it first, and then Lovell reiterated it.
We've had more than a problem.
Yeah, but going back to the thing about Gene Kranz was his whole thing after the Apollo 1 fire, he had a speech with Mission Control, and he said, from this day on, you will be known by 2 words, tough and competent. And he said it's that mindset. It's that mindset of we have a job to do. We're going to do everything in our ability to keep the crew safe. That's what led him to be probably one of the best people to have been in this position for this situation.
And we're watching them kind of shut down the module here. This actually kind of took place. They had about, I would say, in the time from the explosion to shutting down, they were monitoring how much oxygen they had. And I could be mistaken. I'm doing my best here. They were monitoring how much oxygen they had left in the module before they were out of oxygen and therefore usable power. This happened maybe over the span of an hour, if I'm not mistaken. And then they had about 17, 18 minutes to shut everything down and get over to the limb.
Fred Hayes realized very quickly, right after they shut down the fuel cells, he began the process of heading over to the limb. It was unspoken. He knew, because there was actual contingencies in flight plans to use the lunar module as a lifeboat if there were certain failures on the command module.
Right.
So this was not a, oh my God, we suddenly have to come up with something. They knew.
This was a protocol, but this wasn't a foreseen emergency. And we've lost Jesse's audio again real quick. They're right now, what they're trying to do is they're trying to mark what their navigational beacons are so that they can try to continue to navigate back home. If I'm not mistaken, the people on the ground can still start to work on their telemetry and kind of.
Sorry, you froze up. I take it you're asking about the math.
I was just vamping because on my screen you froze, and I was talking about the math being done. They were trying to get some navigational markers so they could tell which way that they were facing, so they could try to get this ship kind of back on track and get a game plan going. But in order to get a game plan going to try to get back to Earth, they had to know which way they're facing. which,
Yep.
as we reiterated
And
earlier, if you don't know,
this
you can lose your orientation real fast out in space.
and this is a very true thing. And I mean, they're using slide rules to calculate mathematical equations for a spacecraft that's they don't know what's going on.
Yep.
So there's a lot of science and there's a lot of just
Think of
hoping
it.
you're right.
Think of it like this: for those of you that don't understand the stress going on right now, imagine being chased by a pack of hungry wolves, and you have to do trigonometry that you haven't studied for in about 10 years, and you've got about 30 seconds to solve the problem before the wolves catch you. That's maybe a close margin of just a tenth of the stress these guys are under.
And none of them are going to show it.
Yep. These are not the guys you want to play poker with because you're not going to get a read on them.
Nope. And this whole thing where Mattingly is sitting in his apartment getting drunk never happened.
No, he would have, if I'm not mistaken, he would have been in mission control just helping out anyways. He would have been on hand to help out, just kind of help with just basic stuff, not helping out in this emergency because at this point I don't think he would have known yet, but he would have been on hand.
I don't think he would have known. I don't remember. He was not. It wasn't one of those things where he wasn't home and they couldn't find him. I believe he was en route somewhere and they had to find him and tell him like, hey, you've got to get back to Houston.
Yeah.
It was him and the astronaut represented finding him as John Young. They were two key personnel in getting the command module procedures together.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just Ken; it was John Young as well.
So I'm seeing a little bit of I caught something here because Mrs. Lovell has said that she got home and I forget who it was, but somebody's like the Russians and these people and those people have already offered to help, and she had no clue what the hell they were talking about.
Yeah. The time that it took to go from Johnson Space Center to their home, I believe, was about 30 to 45 minutes. So they were en route. They got home, and I believe in reality, astronaut Pete Conrad was waiting for them at home.
Yeah.
To tell them like, hey, this is what's going on, and that is true. Anytime an accident would happen, either an astronaut themselves or an astronaut's wife would go stay with the family until a representative from NASA could show up.
Yeah,
and that's a true thing.
He said that her house filled up very quickly.
Yes.
And she couldn't go to a room without somebody being there, and she finally had to lock herself in the bathroom to get a moment's peace. And she just dropped to the floor and started praying right there. And
it's not represented in the movie per se, but it is true.
Yeah, Mrs. Lovell is not a Mary Sue by anything close to a stretch of the imagination. She's a badass. In fact, she's kind of been regarded in her own way as much of a flight veteran as the guys up in the module themselves. She's been there, done that. So you're not going to sweet talk her and sugarcoat her because she knows how these things work.
And she was typically one of the astronaut wives that they would go to whenever there was something that would go on that, hey, we need you to go to this wife's house. Mm-hmm. I believe she was the wife that went to Elliot C's wife when him and Charlie Bassett were killed. Yeah. She was the.
And briefly, we've lost Jesse again. Like I said, folks, Apollo 13 seems to still have a bit of aura about it. So you're going to have to bear with us on some of our technical difficulties. The way our schedules are working out, we've really only got one shot to do this. So in a way, it's almost appropriate that we're having these problems while doing Apollo 13, just because it's just so fitting. But you were speaking about Mrs. Lovell and her being the one that would probably go to the lives of the fallen astronauts there.
Yeah, and it basically just whatever wife they could get a hold of, but they would typically try to get ones that would be a lot more grounded and less emotional.
Steady.
Jan Armstrong was another one. She was the person who told Ed White's wife what happened after the Apollo 1 fire. So, you know, the astronaut's wife was more than just being an astronaut's wife. There was a lot of
And
things that they went through that the public didn't know about.
Right.
and now we're I believe that we've lost radio signal because they're doing a
No,
lunar burn,
no.
or
So
they're
there
moving over to
are
the LEM.
they're moving over to the limb.
That's
There are
right.
actually 3 burns that happen, but we only see one of them in the movie,
Gotcha.
and it's the most dramatic one. They do a burn not long after this, if I remember correctly, to get them more on trajectory for the moon.
God, look at
They
the
do,
acting going on. I'm sorry to cut you off. The acting that goes on there, it harkens back to an episode I said, acting happens here.
yep,
Tom Hanks just
it's
showed
all,
that.
yep.
Just showed
Um,
the enormity of the situation on
so
levels wise.
if I remember, the second burn happens once they come around the moon, and then that's when they shut all the power down, and then they have to do that third burn, which is the most dramatic.
Oh. And this kind of, to a degree, I believe, happened. The case of solve the problem, and that's kind of
Yes.
what they're showing here. I'm sure that there was a lot of stress amongst flight control. I don't know that they would be this tense right off the bat, but I could
No,
be mistaken.
I don't think so. I believe it was one of those things where they were discussing what were the feasible options. Could we do this? Could we do that? What do we
Yeah,
know
this gentleman
works?
here is screaming in the middle of the room. That's not conducive, but I believe that there was a case where Krantz said, yeah, he stopped listening to everything and just started listening to certain things, and once he got to that point, it was a case of just how to solve the problem, and a lot
Yep.
of the external noise just kind of he tuned out. And that's the kind of guy he was by all accounts. He was very laser focused, and
He
I
was
yeah,
he was a fighter pilot in Korea. He was a test pilot. So he himself knew you can't lose your head.
yeah. And now they're talking about the
There's
LEM was
a
not designed for space flight. It was
as
designed for short occupations and a lunar landing.
as the Grumman representative is Harry Carey's brother.
Is he really, or are you just making
No,
a joke?
I'm just making a joke.
Holy cow! Why are you doing that?
The guy looked like Harry Carey. I just always
Yeah.
laugh when I see
So
that scene.
a lot of stuff is now jumping around. I've noticed they're kind of jumping here a little bit, but again, 5-6 day event over the span of 2 hours, they got to jump a little bit and make things work for their time constraint. But
Yep. Like I said,
at this point,
several things are being omitted, like the burn, the
yeah. Oh, we lost Jesse. We lost Jesse again. Um, briefly, they have turned off heaters. They have very little water. I think they were rationing water by this point. They were down like a cup a day because they were having to share their remaining water with the LEM and the rest of the spacecraft in order to keep what little systems they had running going. So things are already hairy, and they'll show that later in the movie. But you figure you're going a couple of days. There's a point where I think Lovell went 27 hours and counting with little to no sleep. And like I said, at this point, you're in freezing conditions. All they've got is a cotton, flight suit. They don't have but a couple of changes of underwear.
So at this point, where they would have been, here's a big myth. They did have enough oxygen. They had plenty of oxygen. They were going to have enough oxygen to survive. The problem that they had was, and you'll see it come up, is the CO2 problem, the carbon monoxide. At this point, the temperature would have dropped to probably about 50 degrees inside the lunar module, probably 40 inside the command module.
Yeah.
What the crew are wearing are called ICGs, in-flight coverall garments. They're made of beta cloth. It is a nylon material. It is very coarse and it is very itchy, but it is fire retardant. That means it will not burn. What they're wearing underneath are long johns with their biomedical sensors and socks.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all they've got on. They don't have a lot of layers.
Yeah,
Um,
and as you said, the CO2 problem is really their biggest issue outside of having no power, because what you breathe inside that thing doesn't go anywhere. It's just
so
scrubbed by the filters.
at this point, they still have a lot of the power on. The air conditioning unit is still circulating the air. They still have lights. Um, so they have a few creature comforts that are still going inside the lunar module. They haven't yet determined that the batteries are going to be drained very quickly.
I'm getting ahead of myself. I apologize.
No, it's okay, because it's something that was being discussed but had not had a solution brought to a head at that point.
Which I believe
Um,
they weren't going to talk to the astronauts about unless they had to, until they had a solution already at hand. They
yeah,
weren't going to add to the mental stress if they could avoid it.
yeah. And so another thing that gets brought up was, why didn't the astronauts put on their spacesuits? So the problem with that were the spacesuits themselves were designed to keep the astronauts cool. Working in space, that suit is a rubber suit, so it was not going to retain
You will
heat. You will perspire, and being as cold as it was, there was no heat. The the underall garment that you wear is a bunch of hoses that pump cold water, glycol, and it would keep your body cool from overheating in a rubber suit in space. So that's why they wouldn't put their spacesuits on, because it would actually make the problem worse.
Yeah. So we're seeing a daydream here by Jim Lovell, and he's on the surface of the moon. Can you speak on the accuracy of what they're showing here in terms of the lunar surface?
Um, so of course you can clearly see that the back of the limb is missing. Um, Little inaccuracies, but the way the moon dust and the regolith looked, very very accurate. What they did for this is what they would end up doing for From the Earth to the Moon, which really uh, was a great Hollywood version of the moonwalks, with the way the moon looked, the powder, the way the footprints looked. Um, Fun fact: that helmet, Jim was the only commander to have something specific on his helmet, because he was a naval captain. He had his anchor.
Gotcha.
He did in fact bring his over helmet back.
What can you give me the significance of the thumb gesture that he has done a couple of times?
I just think that's it's I don't know the significance to it, honestly. I believe it's just something. I don't know if it's something Level did. I think he said it's like, you could basically hold your thumb up and cover the world. And
Yeah,
it was just something that was referenced and was put into the movie.
and it's something small and
It was
that a
something
guy like Tom
from
Hanks would
Apollo
pick
8.
up.
Yeah. You mentioned something to, you're telling an actor about something and you tell them a line and they're like, oh, I'm going to use that, or that's
Yeah.
something clicks. So I feel like Level was saying, on Apollo 8, we could look back, you could hold your thumb out and cover the earth. And I think Tom Hanks would have taken that as, oh, I'm just going to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know the actual accuracy to that, but it's a movie.
Yeah. And again, a guy like Tom Hanks is always going to find idiosyncrasies like that and just pounce on
So
it.
now,
Yeah.
now we're being introduced to a character, this very plucky flight controller, real person named John Aaron.
Yeah. Yep. I was listening to a documentary about this very moment.
John Aaron was a key person in the Apollo 12 situation. He was the person who, when 12 was hit by lightning and all their stuff was knocked off, he recognized the pattern of code being flashed on his screen, and he said, flight, tell them to switch the signal conditioning electronics to auxiliary, SCE to aux. And the flight controller, Jerry Griffin, said, the hell's that? And they radio it up. Pete Conrad goes, FCE to aux, what the hell is that? Well, that gentleman, John Aaron, was the one who knew what it was and told them what to do. And
Yeah.
he was probably the most competent flight controller. He understood what it meant to be an ecom. He knew the environmental systems.
And here he's kind of saying, find me everybody that's ever touched this thing and get them here and work with them. More or less, they did. They had a lot of the people that were involved in the manufacturing of every piece of equipment at their disposal, so they could better understand the condition of
So,
the module that was up there, as well as what the options were and what the capabilities were.
so the time frame in which they're showing this happen was like a day and a half after the explosion, when in reality, that conversation in that room with those people deciding those things happened within the first few hours after the explosion.
Yeah, I like that because earlier it said day four. You know, I like that
Yeah.
it's almost showing that Mattingly has been drunk and unconscious and unreachable for days on end. He very much not the case. He would have still been
No.
at hand anyways. He would have been easily found.
Ken would have been um, at Johnson within maybe an hour to 2 hours.
Yeah, Ken. Yeah, and again we have lost Jesse, but as Jesse was saying, he would have been there very quickly to because he would have had normal duties anyways. Had things gone as planned, he still would have been around and very much a part of the situation. But obviously, the movie takes another bit of liberty here. But he would have definitely had been in and out of Johnson anyway. Just on basic duties. He even had an explosion not have happened, he still would have been around and part of the mission.
Yes, he would have been part of the support crew regardless. Um, like I said, the great thing was you had all of the astronauts that were backup crews and prime crews for upcoming missions that were lending their support and what they knew. A lot of the command module pilots, which would have been at this point, Ken Mattingly would have been helping, Al Warden, Stu Rusa, Ronnie Evans. They all would have been in Houston working with them, trying to figure out, okay, what can we do with the command module?
So, Mattingly goes into the simulator here, and he gives the line about I want the same conditions they're in, I want the same setup, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to me about that. Did that really happen, or is that just a nice form of camaraderie that Ron Howard is trying to give
No,
us? That
in order to understand the situation, he had to know that command module computer was completely shut down.
right.
That he needed to figure out in a particular order how to pull the computer back up.
Well, what I meant by that was is like is he asking for 40-degree temperatures and
No, no,
all
he's not.
that's just Ron Howard kind of he's not there but he's there with them, good camaraderie and team
It's the
spirit and stuff
camaraderie
like
thing.
that. Yeah.
He is in fact going to be in the command module simulator by himself
Yeah.
with them radioing, so he can go through the sequence of the checklist to decide what is more important. Um, it's something that they worked days on. They started on this process immediately.
And here we see more of the infamous cigarette smoke. Obviously not as permeating as reality, but if it was as real as advertised, you would not have a clear shot in the movie. But very much so. Now they're talking about the making the filters, because what happened there, I found this interesting. One section of the spacecraft was designed by one company, and one section was designed by another company, and something so minute that it just slipped through the cracks was this group made the air filters with one shape. And I can't get too deep in there because I can't remember who did what, but one section had the round hole for the filter, and the other section, the other company built their filters to be a square hole.
So North American Aviation built the command module, and they're the ones that built the square lithium hydroxide canister. Grumman Aviation built the lunar module and built the round canisters. So it was not something that was ever considered as something that could happen, because they figured that no matter what happens, it won't be as we can figure
Nobody
it out.
saw this coming.
Either it's bad enough to kill the crew, or it's not going to be bad enough that they can work with what they got.
This was not a situation that was in the flight book as to something that might go wrong. This was an anomaly in a lot of ways. It was, I don't want to say a freak accident, but for lack of a better term, this thing just, it was kind of a freak accident that they found themselves in a position that they just did not have a foreseeable insight to.
Every mission has had some sort of critical thing go wrong with it, be it with 14 with the docking and a landing radar, 11 with its radar. There were things that happened. NASA would always plan for something to go wrong.
Yeah.
And they would train in contingencies. Like there were plans for halfway to the moon, they got to turn around. Well, they're going to use the service propulsion system, the SPS, on the service module. Well, they didn't plan that was going to be completely destroyed. Yeah. There were contingencies to use the LIM engine, depending certain circumstances. So things were planned for, but they never thought that a certain sequence of events would lead them to do what they did.
So can I ask you on a countdown to pause the movie? Because I don't want to get too far ahead because there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. So can we, in 3, 2, 1... All right, so we just saw the scene where the press is setting up. They're wanting to set up their cameras and their satellite equipment things on Mrs. Lovell's front lawn. First things first.
Yep.
Even if it didn't happen, I could totally see Mrs. Lovell responding that way. How did that actually go down?
That did in fact happen.
Okay.
That is a factual thing. She did in fact tell the public relations officer that if the press could not care about my husband's mission when he was going to the moon, there's no reason for me to give the press anything.
Yeah. And I like that line. If you have a problem with it, they can take it up with my husband. He's going to be home on Sunday.
I want to say that she did in fact say that line, but I can't confirm that.
And and again, the way that the actress, as you said, got the nod from Mrs. Lovell, I'm going to even if it's creative license, I buy it 100% because one, it's a rational human emotion, and two, what we've been given versus what we do know about Mrs. Lovell. She doesn't take any shit, nor should she. Right. But
let me know when you're ready to start back up.
Secondly, now they're starting to show the effects of the CO2 and the environment inside the module. And I just wanted to touch on there was a documentary I watched just to give the viewers at home a kind of an understanding of how pressing the situation was with the CO2. There was somebody that agreed to be subjected to the oxygen levels that they would have been under, and the effects and show the effects of how it would affect a human being. And some of the effects are lethargy and mostly cognitive ability. And within 2 minutes of being exposed to this level of CO2, he had trouble remembering basic number patterns very quickly. So to give a better grasp of the situation they're in, again, they've got to find a way to get home and do the math and the trajectory and do all these checklists on this spacecraft from going thousands upon thousands of miles a second, hurtling towards Earth, and they've got to hit it just right under that kind of environment where your body is now starting to betray itself, not only because of the oxygen being tainted because they haven't made the filters yet, but also the fact that these guys are running on very little sleep.
So they were aware of the CO2 problem. Yeah. They were monitoring it for quite some time. NASA was letting them know that they were working on something. Yeah. Did it get as close to as it was in the movie? No, it did not. Because they were aware of it ahead of time and the process had begun. If they had not monitored the situation, the crew would have not been aware of it and would have had problems very, very quickly.
Yeah, I'm wanting to say I heard that they got to the threshold of what would be safe to breathe, but they needed to change those things very quickly. because, as you said, they knew about the problem, but they were running the risk of being in a lot of trouble unless something was done very quickly. So I'll do a countdown again. 3, 2,
Hang
1.
on.
Oh, wait, what? Okay, I'll do the countdown again. I haven't hit anything yet, so
My internet kind of got all wonky, so I didn't hear the last little bit that you were saying, but I know you're probably talking about.
yeah,
Okay,
they
well
they
now
weren't yeah they weren't screwed, but they were getting uncomfortably close.
they were in a position where if they didn't do something within a few hours, they were going to be in trouble.
Yeah. So are you set?
Yep.
3, 2, 1, go. So they're getting ready to have a conversation here, Hayes and Lovell, and again, you're going to see some creative license because the fight that's about to ensue, did not really happen.
No,
because there wasn't time for it.
They would have been tired. They would have been very short, but they were very professional. They were not going to scream and yell at each other
because they'd be just right back in the same problem they were at.
Yep. And unfortunately, Fred Hayes is suffering from a urinary tract infection. Yeah, and it was literally from dehydration. He was in a lot of pain. He had a temperature of 104 degrees.
This is where I was speaking earlier. They were rationing their stuff. They were down to like a half a glass a day.
Less than that.
If that, yeah.
And like I said, he's running a temperature of 104 degrees.
And the closest doctor is 200,000 miles away.
The temperature in the lunar module is probably about 38, 39 degrees. It's just above freezing. The command module itself is probably as cold, if not colder. Like I said, they're not wearing a whole lot. And there's not a whole lot of stuff that he could take. There were medical kits on board that had morphine tablets and things like that, but he refused to take those because he wanted to be of sound mind.
Yeah, you don't want an astronaut under morphine conditions in a situation like this anyway.
Yeah, so he's taking aspirin in hopes that that's gonna at least take the fever down. You and I both know how great aspirin really works with taking fevers down.
Oh, yeah.
800 milligrams of Motrin, hydrate, change your socks.
And rub some dirt on it.
But these are all military men. Like they're tough.
Yes, they have been through their fair share of trials and tribulations. They are not fresh out of the academy being thrust into a situation they've never even come close to being in before. They've had more than a stubbed toe in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously right here, this little pissant argument, which I get Ron Howard saying he needs drama, he needs the human emotion. I get that because, as you said, Jesse, if you were to play the events out the way it really happened, it'd be a very boring movie. In a lot for all. You're
not selling tickets with historical accuracy.
No,
you're selling tickets with drama.
Yeah,
and but the thing is, like, for the most part, you're getting a pretty.
Yeah. And Jesse has cut out again. I'll vamp until he's back. It's perfectly logical for you to believe something like this could have happened. But, if you take the thought a step further, you understand why it never would have happened, just because, as we've said, they're military men. They've been there, done that. And there's just no time in this scenario for them to stop and bullshit like this.
Also,
so continue.
You're not going to want to punch the walls of the lunar module.
No.
Because it is literally a few layers of aluminum.
About the width of a couple of napkins.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. You don't want to be screwing around in there horse playing, let alone getting into a fist fight with, a couple of rookies.
Yeah. So, even if somebody bumped their head, they would have not done that.
I like that Tom Hanks has pretty much proven her point. We're not going to go bouncing off the walls for a problem we're going to have end up right where we started.
And so again, that line was never said on the mission. It was something Lovell would say in interviews afterwards.
Mhm.
And Tom Hanks thought it was a very poignant line and decided to use it in the movie. Um, so yeah, this whole thing with the CO2, they were already aware of
Yeah.
the CO2 problem. It was not as bad, but it was not a good situation.
No.
They were maybe a few hours away from having a critical problem. So NASA was already working on this. I think it took just a few hours for the engineers to literally
God bless
just
engineers.
just absolutely. And the greatest thing about this, it uses duct tape.
Yeah.
NASA,
Don't tell me problem things. Here we go. Here we go.
NASA engineers will swear
That is a
by
legitimate thing.
duct tape.
That is a real thing that really was made, that really happened, that really worked. And I do want to impress upon
prop,
yeah,
that prop that is made was made from the schematics that the flight controllers did.
Yeah.
That is a 1-to-1 replica of what they actually had.
So I just want to impress on the people at home that are watching this in 2020. Imagine being in a situation like this where you don't have one of these things to take a picture of, record the video, do that. You're calling everything over one of these to somebody that's 200,000 miles away, and all they have is their cognitive skills to follow along and put this thing together as you're describing it to them. And I probably didn't get most of that across.
I got a lot of it.
Yeah.
I'm just
there's no cell phone to send pictures. There's no, they're just talking it over a radio to very smart people.
I was looking to see if I had my Apollo 17 flight plan to just show you what the flight plan looked like. It's in a box out of my reach.
That's fine. Just a lot of the things we take for granted even now, they would have murdered to have on this flight.
See, and like the So Scientific, it's like the length of your arm.
Yeah. A lot of this was cut and paste, but it worked.
And see, like you hear them say, hang on, I get what you're going at. They're seeing, okay, they want me to do this. Like they're understanding. Yeah. And the technicians who put it together, put the manual together in such a way that when you're calling it up to somebody, they're going to see it. They know exactly what it is. And it's so amazing, the ingenuity of the NASA technicians on the ground to come up with this.
It kind of reminds me of another space movie with Armageddon with Bruce Willis. You got a bunch of smart people thinking up a shit, and then there are other people just behind them. They're coming up with shit too. Well, kind of the same scenario right here. You had a group of guys sitting in a room that came up with some shit, and it worked.
So interesting thing about this shot. That is real astronaut Wally Schirra in the shot with Cronkite. So that is also a real astronaut that appears in this movie, even though it is archive footage.
I notice the debris around the module is not as prevalent, I believe, as would have been in real life. Because I think they said that a lot of their problem situated around them on the outside was that the debris from the explosion was circling around the module, inhibiting their view a lot of the time, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that, even though it was in the vacuum of space, it just, a lot of stuff followed them.
Yep. Oh, they got a crewman's sock. That filled a hole. This has got to be one of my favorite parts of this story, is creating the filter.
It really is. And again, people who didn't know anything about this would probably like, oh, they're not going to do that. NASA's better than that. It's like,
bullshit.
No, NASA did that. NASA really had to
tell that to NASA.
NASA really had to throw science at the wall to see what stuck.
And that's the thing, is they were so trained in going by the manual.
You can clearly tell that scene was shot on, not in the vomit comet.
We lost you for a second, but to finish my thought there, you could just the ingenuity of it all, and then coming up with it. NASA, I heard this in the documentary today. NASA was very used to not going off of book and off manual. That when this happened, they were going a lot into the realm of there's no manual for this. So they were kind of writing their own history at this point. You cut
There,
out, but continue.
yeah, there. Sorry, like I said, this is the unfortunate that both of our signals keep cutting out. But yeah, no, it was NASA was very stringent about sticking to the plan because space travel is dangerous. You don't know. Oh, I'm just going to try this real quick. Well, you don't know what that's going to do. Um, the fun thing with Apollo 14, Al Shepard was saying, "Well, I'll just suit up and I'll go outside and I'll pull the two spacecraft together."
So I
And
wanted
NASA
to touch
goes,
on that.
"No, you're not."
When was the first lunar walk for
The
reference?
first moonwalk,
No, the first spacewalk, I should say. When did you get the picture of the astronaut just floating by a tether outside in space? Because a lot of people that
1960.
might be listening to this and watching this for the first time would say, well, why didn't they just go outside and fix the problem?
Yeah, the first EVA was in 1965, and
Right.
it was by Alexei Leonov, a Russian. He had the problem that it was the first EVA, so they didn't know what it was going to do. His suit ballooned up to where he couldn't get back in the spacecraft, so he had to drain his oxygen to climb back inside.
And that's 5 years prior to
Americans
this, and
had,
that's Russia.
and the Americans had issues doing spacewalks on Gemini because there was a lot of unknowns that once you do this, you're suddenly tumbling, and they didn't know how to counteract that. Spacewalking outside of the spacecraft in flight was so dangerous because they didn't understand the physics of it. They didn't understand the mechanics of how you had to move. And for every action that you have, there's a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just too dangerous. It was too
Every
risky.
action has an equal opposite reaction. Oh, sorry, that's another movie. That's another time. That I want to touch on Hamilton at some point too. But yeah. So I get what we're saying there is the option to spacewalk and get out there with a monkey wrench and start tightening some bolts, even though that would not have even come close to fixing the problem here, wasn't even an option at this point.
So the whole idea of doing an EVA to see what was wrong, the process to suit up and to get the spacecraft prepped for decompression and the astronauts to go outside. All the astronauts have to put on their suits.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you can't just have one guy put on a suit and go outside. Everybody has to put on a suit.
So yeah. And here we're.
I know. Can
yeah.
you still hear me?
I can still hear you.
Okay,
I'm
so-
sad that we overtalked that scene though of Granny Lovell saying if they can come up with a machine that flies, my Jimmy can fly it. You know,
Yeah.
that great line. I don't know if that really happened, but that
Don't know
definitely
either.
belongs in this story.
But I just touching on the EVA thing, like they would have to, all the astronauts would have to suit up.
Mhm.
You're going to waste resources and power to decompress the spacecraft. You're wasting oxygen. To open the hatch, go outside. Oh shit, there's nothing I can do. Go
Yeah.
back inside, repressurize. You've wasted so much resources just to
Doesn't work
be like, well,
like
there's
it
nothing I
does
can
in the
do.
movies. It does not go that simple.
Yeah.
Oh man. Now this scene where Tom Hanks's Jim Lovell starts ripping off his medical equipment
Biomed
here.
sensors.
Yeah. I have no data on this. Talk me through it.
From my understanding, they didn't do that.
I could see them having a huge problem with them doing that too. And in a situation like this where they any second now, let's be real, any second now that thing could depressurize and explode for all we know. Because they just don't know the extent of the damage at that point. You don't want something like that going offline too.
As far as I know, no, this did not happen. They did not rip off their medical sensors. I believe they did turn them off. They had a way to turn them off.
Mhm.
but I think they did it just to be
Now,
like, hey, cut us some slack. Now they did not pull their biosensors out.
are those biosensors? Let's talk about that for just a second. Um, are those running off of power from the module itself, or are those self-powered, or is that eating up battery power?
I believe they were connected in with the communication umbilical, so they were drawing power.
I was gonna say I would think they at some point they would have to be communicating with the module to be sent back down to Earth. So those things are eating power too.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how much power the medical stuff would have drained.
Because
So
obviously I'm thinking of those 20 amps that'll come into play here later. Would that have been something they could have turned off to try to gain some power, save some power? Who knows? I see we've lost you again. I'm just speculating here. I see we've got a frozen hot dog on the screen here.
okay.
I can't, but going back to what I said is that
Speaking of frozen,
yeah, 20 amps, the 20 amps conversation where we've seen Mattingly in the module going over the scenarios and the checklist. Would those medical suits that they were wearing, would that have been something they could have considered turning off to save or even boost power?
I'm not sure because I believe they were tied in with the communication line, so I don't think they were drawing any additional amperage. If it was minute.
It was neglectable.
So this is the burn that they wanted to have in the movie, just for the fact of, um, they literally did this with no guidance computer.
Right.
They had to do this.
This was the first documented case of them doing that without any type of. I lost you again. Hold on. Hold on. We lost you again briefly, but I believe what you're going to say is this is like the first time that people were flying without any type of guidance.
You're literally
I lost
doing
you
it by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, I did lose you, but I think we were touching the same thing. First time documented in history of NASA that they were flying without any type of computer guidance.
Yeah, this showed how skilled the astronauts were to do this without the computer.
So Jim Lovell is more badass than Harrison Ford's Han Solo will ever be. I'm sorry, because he actually did the damn thing. You don't really fly manually in space. You don't do it.
Yeah, this whole concept of spaceships being able to turn on a dime in space, it is impossible.
A lot of things we take for granted. There is no friction in space. There's no real aeronautics the way we think of them down here on Earth with airplanes. They don't operate like that, Chief. No. It's a lot of inertia driven propulsion. I just want you to know that limb is not designed to do that.
See, does he not look like Harry Carey?
Look, man, you keep bringing up Harry Carey, I'm going to get misty-eyed because I miss and love that man to death every day since he died. I actually legit broke down in tears the day that it was announced. I was in class and kids made fun of me for it, and that has always hurt my feelings. I know we were just kids, but that's never sat right with me. I admit it. But anyway, getting back to the story at hand, you're seeing condensation on the windows. You are seeing the effects of the anguish and the stress.
That 100% would have been true. The limb would have been just covered
the condensation.
With ice.
Yeah, just the condensation.
Well, what you're thinking about is in the sunlight, it's 250 to 300 degrees, where in the shadow, it is negative 250 to 300 degrees. That's a stark contrast.
Let's think about that for a second. We've all been there in the wintertime, man. It gets cold. Things get brittle. Now multiply that by the coldness in space. Imagine just hitting, because they're not really showing it here, but they're going upwards of what, like 10,000 miles or something a second?
A free return trajectory from the moon is 25,000 miles an hour.
Yeah. So I'm going to sidetrack here a little bit to make my point. Years later, with Columbia, the disaster of Columbia, which was caused by a piece of styrofoam hitting a wing on the space shuttle, which caused the heat paneling to be damaged and cracked. That went with something like 400 miles an hour or something and hit the wing. So they're going 12,000 miles a second in space. There could be space debris of any sort in the way that might hit that window and crack it, in my opinion.
No, so a spacecraft orbiting the Earth is traveling, I believe it is 15,000 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
A vehicle returning from the moon is going to have a higher return velocity because essentially they're falling. They're coming out of the moon's gravity and falling into Earth's gravity. Whenever they would do their burn to get out of lunar orbit, it would accelerate the spacecraft towards Earth. So Apollo 10 was the fastest, coming in at like 25,000, over 25,000 miles an hour on reentry. Apollo 13 is going to hit that. They're going to come in at 25,000 miles an hour.
That's a ride right there.
And it's true. They have a narrow 6-degree corridor that they have to hit in order to enter safely.
Which we're going to hit on that here in a little bit, for sure. But my point was, with the condensation being on the window, with it being cold, I'd imagine it's just a little bit more brittle than normal. Think about the luck that goes into not hitting anything that could have broken that window.
Well, thankfully, at this point of their mission, there was not as much space debris as there is now. Where they were so far out into space that the odds of them running into anything would have been mathematically improbable.
And
something that they did, and this happened on all missions, was it was called thermal passive control. And It was a thing called the barbecue roll, where the spacecraft would continuously roll.
Like
even
a rotisserie
after
chicken.
This, yep. They would still have this going to keep the spacecraft evenly heated and cooled.
And that's coming from the sun, I'm assuming, the heat?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Because the sun is constantly hitting the spacecraft. There's nothing to block the sun from hitting the spacecraft. So they have to consistently stay in a roll. And it's not shown in the movie because you'll see the background where it's very static. They are rolling. They are consistently rolling. And that's just it's called thermal passive control. It's to keep the temperature even across all of the spacecraft.
Right. You don't want to.
Because if you leave something in sunlight long enough, it's going to burn it.
Gotcha.
That was the case with several Skylab missions.
So I wanted to touch, as we're getting ready to start the process of the LEM coming towards Earth to make its approach here. Mrs. Lovell, I believe it was, gave an interesting quote on the quintessential scenario at hand. Imagine you're in a pub and you're playing darts. You're standing about 20 feet away from the dartboard. A slight miscalculation, you might miss the bullseye, but you'll still hit the board, right? The problem is they're playing darts from about a mile away. A slight miscalculation there, forget it. And that's the problem that she boiled it down to, that they had at hand, is the math had to be so right. They had a 6-degree target to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, so they didn't either skip off or come in too hot and just burn to an absolute rotisserie chicken crisp. Because now that we've talked about the barbecue roll, now I'm thinking barbecue chicken. Thank you for that. But I've found that 6-degree angle of approach very fascinating, especially when we start to get into the finish of this movie, and I'll touch on that in a little bit. But just, my goodness, 6 degrees is not a lot. And you're talking, you're moving isn't. That speed from that distance with all those external factors on a crippled ship. It's mind-boggling. Yeah, they're wondering about a burst helium disk.
Yeah, so that's a very common thing that would happen on the lunar module. Once it was on the moon, the helium disk that was used in the descent stage for fuel would just overpressurize and pop.
It's a balloon.
So that was not uncommon. Yep.
I like that line. The world's getting awfully big in the window. That
A
situation.
very similar conversation was had that they were very curious as to, hey,
You gonna give
we're
us
we're kind of
the
waiting.
story
Like,
here,
do you have
or
something for us?
Ken's working on it? Which, and it would just have been
And this
Ken in
was
this scenario, or just one astronaut. They wouldn't have
it.
all
It
three in
it
there
would have
working on it.
it would have not it would have not just been Ken. There would have been probably John Young and another command module pilot
That makes
assisting
sense.
him at this point to figure it out.
That makes more sense. I was just
For
thinking
dramatic license, they
yeah,
had Ken
one
by himself,
person
but
does not make as much sense as having three, for sure.
well, the thing is, something that's not touched on. Jim Lovell was a command module pilot on Apollo 8, so he understood the command module pilot's role and what he would need to look for. That's why at the towards the end when they're getting ready to come back, he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so used to the left hand seat." Because when he flew Apollo 8, he was in that seat more than the commander was. That's usually the commander's seat during liftoff. But for the rest of the mission, that's where the command module pilot sits.
And here we got another scene. I don't think Mr. Krantz would have been this desperate. That right there would have never, ever happened.
Yep. He would have never lost his cool in front of his troops.
That is where the mission would have been
cool.
lost.
Yep. He would have lost his cool in private where nobody could see him, and then regain his composure and come out and be
And that's that's kind of a bug's life. I harken back to that a lot. The first rule of leadership is everything is your fault. We'll take that a step further. The first rule, in leadership, everybody's looking at you.
Yeah.
Everybody.
And that's something that's just, like I said, with Hollywood, it's not an exciting story if he was like, okay, well, get me those procedures. No, that's not going to sell tickets. Him having a temper tantrum is going to sell tickets.
And the computer is now up.
And my timeline may be wrong, but I don't think they cut it as close as they did in the
I
movie
doubt.
with getting the procedures.
Again, dramatic license is starting to
Yeah,
really rear its head here.
I don't remember the timeline, but
yeah,
I do know that it was close, but it was not as close as the movie makes it.
and again, drama sells tickets. Aquarius used.
Yeah, that whole there was a little line like, "Hey, did you try it on the hardware?" No, they were able to test a lot of it to make sure that it wasn't going to fry everything.
They rehearsed it a lot. NASA's big on rehearsals, especially in this point in time. They want it done down to the nth degree. You understand the process of what you're about to do. They're very big. I was saying they're very big on rehearsals and getting this right. They don't just throw it out. All right, we got to go. They'll go over it a couple times, make sure that they've got all the beats down to where it's just normal, it's natural flow. Hey, it's Neil and Buzz. I love this. Are you boys in the space
What a line.
What was
We've lost Jesse again. While we wait for him to come back again, we've got Mr. Swaggart here going over the process step by step. But as I iterated earlier, they were very big on making sure that before that transmission ever happened, where they started sending stuff up to the module, that the guy relaying the message knew it by heart backwards and forwards. But we were talking about the scene there with Neil and Buzz. Jesse?
Yeah. I was just making an anecdote that the actor that played Neil Armstrong for 5 seconds in this movie really looked like Neil Armstrong. I think he was probably the most accurate depiction of somebody in this movie for somebody who was in it for more than, no more than 5 seconds.
Are you boys in the space program too? But yeah, the this we'll see it a couple of times that Mr. Swaggart has put up a "Do Not Touch" sign on the console. Talk to me about that. Real or
that
fiction?
apparently was real. It was just, it wasn't because he was mad. It was him making sure that he flipped the right switches.
Right. They just said they're a little underweight, so they're coming in a little shallow here. As you know, obviously they were expected to come home with a few hundred pounds of moon rocks, because the original intent of this was to go study a different part of the moon than they'd originally landed on the first time with Apollo 11. They believed there was different material on the hills and mountains of the moon, and that was the scientific nature of this flight. That angle is going to come back to play here again in a little bit, and we'll talk on it some more. We'll talk about it some more when we get there.
But the main thing they needed to do was they needed to transfer ballast over, because what they were seeing was the reentry trajectory projection was showing that they were shallow. It's like, oh shit, it's because we don't have like 200 extra pounds in the command module. So basically what they did, everything they could get, they just started throwing it from the limb to the CM just for ballast.
Yeah.
The scene with him with that little sticky note saying no. The reason why is because the switches for the lunar module and service module jettison were very close to each other, and he wanted to make sure he didn't flip the wrong one, being tired, sleep deprived, oxygen deprived, dehydrated. He wanted to make sure he hit the right switch.
They're showing Lovell's son here at military prep school, and he said that most of his friends and comrades and compatriots and fellow classmates and all that were cool, but a couple of them were dicks. But he specifically spoke about his physics teacher that said it's going to be all right, it's all fake anyway. And he's like, and you're a physics teacher? And he walked away. And I thought that was just such a badass moment right there for a kid to have. Sticking up for his dad right there. That's really good.
I never heard that.
I will send you the documentary. It's the one I told you about from BBC. They interviewed him, and he said that his physics teacher like, it's all fake anyway. And he said to the physics teacher, and you're a physics teacher. And he walked away. I was like, that's a badass moment. So here we are. They're powering up the computer. They have power again at long last. They can see, they can calculate a little bit. They have their first bit of real good news in a few days right here.
Yeah, and what's really helping them is the fact the umbilical. They're drawing power from what's left of the lunar module to keep the batteries going.
And I find this interesting. They reference a typhoon warning on the edge of the recovery area of operation, but it never really talked on and touched again. Was that a real necessary factor of fear on anybody's part, or is that more or less just good information to keep track of? Are they really concerned at this point of a typhoon, or is that just another case of just historical? We're just throwing that in there. Because obviously you have to be wary of it if you're going to go send out a carrier to go get them. Here we go.
I believe that it wasn't at the prime recovery zone. It was at one of the recovery zones.
One whole side of the spacecraft. And this is where they first get an inclination that they may not be out of the woods yet. Yeah. The heat shield. Now, I actually had this explained to me a little bit ago. I never really understood the rapid descent into Earth orbit. My perception of reentry into atmosphere was admittedly based off of Star Wars and things of that nature, where you just fly in at seemingly just a slow speed and everything's okay. I didn't quite understand why that wouldn't work until recently. You're talking about two separate forms of gravity pulling on each other, creating friction, believe it or not, that causes you have to go so fast to break one to get into the other. Otherwise, as we said, you're going to bounce off of the atmosphere.
So what's happening is you're going from no atmosphere to into the atmosphere. You're literally hitting a brick wall of air. And if you come in too steep, straight down, there's no way to dissipate the energy. If you come in too shallow, you'll hit it and you'll come right back out.
Slingshot, pretty much what happened with the moon.
What the command module does is, as it comes down, these reaction control thrusters will spin and it will curve itself in and out during reentry until it slows down. So basically, it's making a parabolic arc.
Yep, kind of like a bullet.
And it's slowing itself down until it finally starts dropping. And that's when the drogues will deploy.
So when you see the Millennium Falcon fly into atmosphere, again, 100% bullshit. Unless they're using some type of metal that is heat resistant to a degree hitherto unknown to our cognizance. Bullshit.
Yeah, like I said, unfortunately, movies are not cool when you have science fact. You have to exaggerate and make things a little bit more dramatic to make them a lot cooler.
Boy, Fredo is not in good shape at this point at all. As I imagine someone with a kidney and bladder infection probably would not be.
Oh, he according to him, he was pretty miserable. It was difficult for him to do the tasks that he needed to do.
Nice little moment here. Again, there's no way of knowing if it's, obviously they don't know, the other would be looking out anyway, but it's a nice moment of they're both looking at the same thing from different points of view, That good human story here.
Well, that's all this movie is. It's a human interest story.
And it is. It's a very human story. The human story here, how are you going to get these guys back? Can you get them back? Was that heat shield damaged? Do they have enough power? Do they have, the list goes on and on of all the things that can and did go wrong here. And somehow, as we're going to find out, everything still managed to turn up okay at the end. Here we go. Sorry, Jack. Old habit. Kind of used to the pilot seat. It's yours to fly. Now, I don't know if it happened exactly like that, but as you've said, that conversation more or less did occur.
Oh, there you are.
Oh, wow. I was just I paused it at 2:01 the second I dropped out.